Welcome to this explainer on the wildly complex and honestly incredibly high-stakes world of IT audit ethics. When we think about IT audits, we usually picture, well, endless spreadsheets, right? Checklists, compliance boxes, that sort of thing. But beneath that clinical surface, it's literally an absolute minefield of ethical gray areas. Today, we're dissecting the real-world dilemmas outlined in Chapter 2 of the IT Ethics Handbook, and we're going to explore exactly where those lines are drawn when millions of dollars, personal privacy, and actual human livelihoods are on the line. Okay, let's dive into this, because this quote by Paul Craig perfectly frames our entire discussion. He says, "Auditors must remain the inhuman, emotionless workers of the world with no strings attached who simply find the truth." Wow. An auditor's ultimate job is to find and report the truth without bias, for sure. But as we'll see today, remaining inhuman and emotionless is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, when you're dealing with real people, real friendships, and massive corporate pressures. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. Don't worry, we're going to tackle these dense ethical arenas in a really structured way. We'll be looking at 1. Withholding audit information. 2. Auditing the internet. 3. Managing conflicts of interest. 4. Policy versus legal requirements. 5. Technical aspects of audits. And finally, 6. IT audits during mergers. And our definitive guide for untangling all these scenarios is the IT Ethics Handbook. We're zeroing in on Chapter 2 specifically. We are going to unpack the real-world dilemmas and case studies it presents, giving us a really solid, structured way to evaluate the right and wrong actions for IT pros out there in the field. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it grounds our discussion in actual, real-world consequences. This isn't just theoretical classroom ethics, you guys. The fallout from massive corporate disasters like Enron completely shattered market trust, and that led directly to the gavel dropping with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act back in July 2002. So now IT audits are legally bound to strict record retention rules, tight internal controls, and the requirement for independent verification. Failing an ethical test here, it doesn't just mean a slap on the wrist. It can literally mean federal law violations and broken companies. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, withholding audit information. So, imagine you're embedded in a company, auditing their systems. You've developed a pretty great working relationship with the IT team over there. Then, you find a glaring security vulnerability. Do you pull your buddy aside and say, "Hey, fix this right now off the record before I write my report so I don't have to cite you for it"? Right away, your ethical compass is severely tested. It's personal loyalty going head-to-head with your professional duty. The handbook actually presents two distinct ways to look at this. The strict conservative view argues firmly that you must absolutely separate business from friendship, period. Your job is to audit and report, not to help the company pass the audit. Doing favors, well, that damages your independent reputation. But on the flip side, the more pragmatic, liberal view argues that the ultimate goal here is a secure system. If tipping them off gets the problem fixed faster, the underlying issue is solved, right? So, the crucial point is that covering up a glaring problem is always a bad idea. Your reputation as an auditor, and honestly, your legal safety, relies entirely on transparency. The absolute wisest path is to stick to the initial audit agreements. If those rules allow for remediation periods, great, use them legally. But you should never secretly bury a material finding just to do someone a favor. Moving on to Section 2, auditing the internet. Let's say you're auditing an internet service provider to make sure their privacy policies are actually working. Now, this position gives you God-level access to user log files, meaning you can see exactly who went to what websites. The temptation is absolutely there. Do you peek out of pure curiosity? Does your role as an auditor basically give you a blank check to invade personal internet privacy? Well, the source material is crystal clear here. You must avoid reviewing the details of personal user data unless it is an explicit, functional requirement of the audit itself. And even then, you absolutely must have the legal authority and the explicit permission of the system administrator to do it. In this scenario, curiosity is the enemy of ethics. Maintaining those boundaries is paramount. Okay, up next is Section 3, managing conflicts of interest. And this brilliantly illustrates how different conflicts scale, from slightly gray areas to outright unethical behavior. Receiving small holiday gifts? It's debatable, but conservative auditors will usually politely decline just to maintain perfect neutrality. Recommending a buddy's software? Now that's risky. Some might say it's just helpful consulting, but others warn it definitely crosses the line into making management decisions. But selling audit data to a competitor? No way. That is corporate espionage. It is never ethically acceptable and totally destroys the core trust of the entire auditing profession. Let's step it up a notch with Section 4, Policy versus Legal Requirements. What happens when you're performing an internal audit to check a company's business policies, but boom, while doing so, you discover they are actively violating federal laws? Things like HIPAA in the medical field or strict IRS rules. Suddenly, you're caught in a tug-of-war between your client and the federal government. Well, the framework tells us to take very specific logical steps. First, do your homework and seek credible advice regarding your legal duties. Second, educate the company. You have to give them the chance to remediate the noncompliance. But ultimately, step 3, you must fulfill your legal obligations within your client agreements. You simply cannot be a silent party to illegal activity. All right, let's get into the technical weeds. Section 5, Technical Aspects of Audits. Picture this. You're hired to perform a network audit, and you decide the absolute best way to find vulnerabilities is to act like a hacker. So you fire up a port scanner, or maybe you launch a full-blown penetration test, all without telling the company's IT team. Does the end justify the means here? Does your desire for technical thoroughness actually justify breaking the standard rules of engagement? There's a really sharp divide on this issue. The conservative approach views unsanctioned port scanning as highly invasive misconduct done without consent. It can crash servers, cause panic, the whole shebang. The liberal view, however, argues that if you're hired to find vulnerabilities, well, port scanning is implicitly necessary for an effective network audit. They argue you simply can't do your job blindfolded. The real resolution here all comes down to communication. Ethical technical testing requires a close relationship and explicit permission from the system administrators to avoid system disruption. Surprising a client with a pen test that knocks their entire operation offline, that's not brilliant auditing. That's just a simulated attack. Explicit permission is exactly what separates the ethical professional from a malicious rogue actor. Let's move to and see how this builds into our high-pressure climax. Section 6, IT audits during mergers. You've got to picture this scenario. You are auditing a smaller company that's about to be acquired by a massive corporation. You uncover some really serious system flaws. The employees of the smaller company literally beg you to suppress the findings, because if you publish the truth, the large corporation will pull out, the smaller company will go bankrupt, and hundreds of people will lose their jobs. This is where human compassion is pitted directly against your professional integrity. So what do? The internal conflict here is massive. The conservative view is completely uncompromising. An auditor must disclose all material facts. Failing to do so distorts the truth and destroys your credibility. Basically, suppressing data is fundamentally unethical. The liberal view, which is driven heavily by compassion, suggests you might suppress the data, but only if the smaller company can absolutely guarantee they will fix the flaws entirely before the merger finalizes. However, the handbook strongly concludes that suppressing audit data is practically never the right answer. It's just incredibly dangerous. Maintaining your independence, fulfilling your initial contract, and delivering the unvarnished truth, that is the auditor's true north. Think about it. If you hide problems, the larger company inherits a broken system based on a lie, and you basically become complicit in that deception. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, going from simple policy tweaks to the very livelihood of entire companies. IT auditing is clearly far from emotionless. It requires a really active, rigorous ethical framework. So I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. Knowing the strict rules of the profession, how would you actually handle that immense pressure if it was your own friends' jobs on the line during a merger? Would you stand firm? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning those gray areas.